The reading is taken from Mark chapter 14, verses 53 to 65. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the priests, elders, and teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, "I will destroy this man-made temple, and in 3 days will build another, not made by man." Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy." And the guards took him and beat him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Hello. If we've not met before, my name's Mary Edwards, and I'm one of the lay readers at Aldridge Parish Church. Looking at this passage about Jesus before the Sanhedrin, what a farce. Call that a trial, an investigation, or a hearing? Whatever you might call it, it was fixed from start to finish. So who were the Sanhedrin? Well, there were councils that arranged local things and heard local cases in local areas, but this one, the Sanhedrin, was the national council. It was made up of over 70 men, many of them from leading families. There were Pharisees, lawyers, elders, teachers of the law, and so on. It met in Jerusalem under the supervision of the high priest for that year. It was respected by and much used by the Romans, although they had retained the right to decide on any sentence that was so serious it might result in the death sentence. All these men in the Sanhedrin would certainly have known the Old Testament writings, many of them, I'd imagine, from boyhood. And they knew the teaching on how much God demands justice, justice for all. For example, if we read the last few chapters of the book of Isaiah, we see verses like, "Loose the chains of injustice and set the oppressed free," or that famous verse from Micah chapter 6, verse 8. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So based on these standards, there were rules about how a trial should be held, how it should be run. And I think we can assume that all of these men would have known these rules. So knowing that, what did they do? Let's look at the evidence. Justice should be done and be seen to be done. So the hearing should have been held during the day. It wasn't. It was held at night, as Mark records it. It should have been held openly in the official council chamber, but it wasn't. It was held secretly in the house of the high priest. It should have been held at a time that was not immediately before a festival, because the festival would have closed things down for the day. This was held on the eve of the Passover. Apart from all that, the high priest did his best to get Jesus to incriminate himself. He then pronounced the death sentence at the end of this meeting of the Sanhedrin. He should have waited, according to the rules, for a second hearing the following day. There were no defence witnesses. They're notable by their absence. And as for the prosecution witnesses, they contradicted each other, were thoroughly dishonest, and that disposed of any claim that Jesus wanted to destroy the temple. In many ways, this trial was illegal. But why were they anxious to do it this way? What were they afraid of? And why all the hurry to get it done and over with and finished so quickly? think they wanted to be rid of Jesus, this upcountry preacher and healer who was loved by many, but every time he taught, he clashed with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Perhaps he might try to take their power or cause an illegal uprising that would infuriate the occupying Romans. Trying him in public would have had its own problems, particularly as the crowd would have been on his side. So they did it in private, and I suspect, worst of all, they did it having already decided both the verdict and the sentence. Now they needed very serious grounds for a sentence of death, so they accused him of wanting to destroy the temple, and when that didn't work, they tried to get him on a charge of blasphemy. With all this against him, it's notable that Jesus didn't try to defend himself, at least not until the high priest asked him the one big question. Are you the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus answered briefly, saying that he was, and that was all they needed to condemn him, and they hoped to get rid of him forever. Now such a claim was indeed blasphemy, unless, of course, it was true, which it was. It was true, and it still is true. I have to admit that when I first started looking seriously at the person of Jesus, I had to admit that although he was certainly a good man, he wasn't just a good man. Looking at the whole of his life, he was either out of his mind, or he was evil, or he was who he said he was, the Son of God. Now this is the first time that Mark acknowledges Jesus as saying, yes, I am the Son of God. In Mark 8, Mark records how Jesus asked his disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter replied, and I bet you could have heard a pin drop, you are the Christ. But at that point, Jesus told his disciples not to go telling everyone else. Interestingly, later, after Jesus' vile, cruel death on the cross, Mark records the centurion, by any standards, a hardened soldier, as saying, after all he'd seen and all he'd heard of Jesus, surely this man was the Son of God. Son of Man, a title he often wanted to use for himself, Son of God. Jesus is God in human form, God we can understand and we can know for ourselves. So looking back to the situation in front of the Sanhedrin, what was actually happening? Who was on trial? Above all, who was in control? Now, if we look at other examples in the life of Jesus, he was very quick to stand up to a crowd, particularly when his life or someone else's life was in danger. Think back to the time when he saved the life of the woman taken in adultery, John chapter 8. And he looked at the crowd and said, let you who are without sin cast the first stone. And again, you could probably hear a pin drop as you heard the stones drop onto the ground, and they quietly slipped away. All the time, a different situation in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus has preached in the synagogue in Nazareth, been rejected in his own hometown by a crowd who then tried to drive him out of the town and throw him off a steep cliff. He just walked through the crowd and went on his way, which must have given them something to think about. What a man. Even in a life and death situation, Jesus stayed calmly in control. And here before the Sanhedrin, his life was in danger, yet he stayed in control. Because I think Jesus knew what was going to happen. Now in Mark's Gospel, there are several other examples where Jesus predicts what will happen to him. For example, in Mark chapter 10, we are going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. Or Mark 8, the Son of Man must be rejected by the elders, chief priests and teachers of the law, be killed and rise again. Mark 14, she poured perfume on my body to prepare for my burial. He knew, but he still let it happen. Jesus didn't need to go up to Jerusalem, but he did. At the Last Supper, he knew what Judas was going to do, but he still went to the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew he could face down a powerful crowd, but in Gethsemane, he let the soldiers take him. He knew that trial before the Sanhedrin was illegal, but he said very little, except to confirm that he was the Son of God. Meanwhile, those who'd followed him for years fell away, and those who'd hated him for years set out to get rid of him. But still, he let all this happen. Jesus was in control. He is in control. And when we feel that our lives are out of control, or we're set in circumstances which are not within our control, and just at the moment, that could apply to just about anyone, then he is the person to whom we can turn, whatever our situation. Coming back to this trial before the Sanhedrin, why did Jesus let all this happen? Well, in Mark chapter 10, Mark records Jesus as saying, "The Son of Man came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus did this for me, for you, for anyone who turns away from their sin and turns their life over to him. Yes, anyone who wants his new life. In the well-known words of a song that we shall doubtless sing in the next few weeks, there was none other good enough to pay the price of sin. He only could unlock the gates of heaven and let us in. He died, he rose again, Son of Man and Son of God. So let's praise him, worship him, get to know him much better, and then follow him more. Amen.